Chairman, forgive me for sitting down. I'm here today wearing two hats, and I would indulge you. I would request your indulgence to let me speak on behalf of two issues. Firstly, I'm here as a shareholder, but I'm head of SME Alliance in Scotland, and I'm representing them. I would just reassure you that, contrary to any perception there may be, this is not a bank-bashing organisation, as our chairman was at pains to point out at the FT conference on banking standards 2 weeks ago. Ross, I believe you were sharing the platform as a speaker. At that event, our chairman said he was there because he felt that bank customers who had lost out through poor governance, lack of regulation, and lack of being treated fairly in the banking system needed to be heard. SME Alliance is not necessarily a single-issue organisation, but inevitably most of the current membership was drawn to it because they felt there was no other way of expressing their helplessness at being contemptuously dismissed by their banks. The members are drawn from customers of all the banks. However, mindful of the very recently published report concerning the number of complaints made about banks in general, RBS having the highest number of complaints, it is therefore inevitable that our membership is representative of that figure, with a high proportion being RBS customers. SME Alliance would prefer if the membership could bring their complaints to you and receive a conciliatory response. However, you persist in making this virtually impossible with your adversarial and confrontational attitude, which I must say was not helped one little bit by a recent newspaper article attributed to one of your most senior directors, labelling some failed business owners as chancers who had put their lives into failed businesses and were now looking for a bailout. This was followed by the further comment, "Let them sue, we'll see them in court." Irrespective of who that senior director is, it is you, Ross, as Chief Executive, who bears responsibility for what emanates from your bank. Therefore, I would like to address you directly. You make public announcements claiming engagement with your customers and earning their trust. I ask you this: do you earn trust by insulting customers who have genuine grievances that you refuse to address? Do you not realise that this is about real people and real lives, not just about numbers and units? It is little wonder that you are repeatedly forced to respond that allegations have caused and continue to cause huge reputational damage to the bank when there is such arrogant and contemptuous dismissal of customers' legitimate and genuine complaints. Is it any wonder that there are so many vocal customers and ex-customers of the bank, victims of financial vandalism, who are now incensed at being branded as chancers seeking a payday? It is little wonder that one of the financial advisors to SME Alliance perceptively noted, "Banking is where integrity is just the name of a racehorse." The Tomlinson exposures last October, the revelations from BBC Newsnight and BuzzFeed of the dash for cash, followed by the disclosure of the victory emails sent by the GRG division when yet another hapless victim was financially massacred, just serve as a direct counter to your repeated assertions. Frankly, Ross, I question your grasp of honesty, integrity, trust and ethics when dismissing these allegations. You publicly acknowledge legacy issues, but clearly make no attempt at addressing illegality within the bank. Capitulating last week in the Hawkins case, agreeing a settlement of their long-running dispute, surely served as an example of how confrontation could have been avoided had we chosen to address them constructively with a conciliatory approach. Ross, there is a huge deluge of complaints from some very vocal victims, which you simply and contemptuously dismissed by denying their legitimacy. The Hawkins are just but one example And through SME Alliance, I can tell you that for all the Hawkins, for all the Clive Mays, for all the Andy Keats, for all the Mike Wilsons, and for all the Andy Coys, to name but a very few, there are many, many more victims like me standing behind with exactly the same stories of illegal conduct. It is wholly inconceivable that we are all wrong when we have any amount of evidence examined by legal and financial experts verifying the claims as being legitimate, and in most instances clearly identifying that fraud is the common theme running through each and every case. Can I direct you to look very closely at the recent example set by another chief executive of a public company, Thomas Cook, Peter Frankhauser, whose shining example of corporate governance and leadership demonstrates to the public a very encouraging and enlightened attitude from a company boss who finally saw the light and took personal responsibility for so many failings within Thomas Cook. Of specific note is his admission that the company spent 10 years talking about their customer and not talking with their customer. He ditched his advisors and spoke directly with the customer, thereby achieving a solution that could have been reached so much sooner had common sense and understanding prevailed. I really wish to take issue with you, Ross, when you regularly appear before the media saying that all allegations of criminality have been investigated with no evidence being found, and earnestly asking customers to trust the bank as it has set aside the past and dealt with the legacy issues. Well, Ross, I think you've perhaps been imbibing far too much of Scotland's best-known export, believing your own sound bites and ignoring a wealth of evidence provided by a multitude of exposures that appear with regularity in all the media. Should you take time to consider your false statements and the effect they may have on the general public, I think even the simplest of minds would understand that internal self-examination and reporting will never reveal the truth. Please, Ross, cease with the insults. Drop the crooks, the connivers and the cover-up brigade within the bank. Stop being cloth-eared and be like Peter Frankhauser. Take on board what he plainly and honestly stated and realise you cannot win when confronted by thousands of complaints which are similar in nature and revolve around one division within the bank. Actions speak louder than words, and perhaps, just perhaps, with deed instead of words, our membership and the wider number of aggrieved customers will start to believe you and give you a chance of retrieving the trust you have destroyed and of repairing the huge gulf separating you from the millions of customers, because very evidently you and the bank are currently and widely perceived as a disgrace. Many at SME Alliance have been forced to pursue the bank through the courts, and I know that you are well aware of an impending action against you with multiple claimants, of which I am one. It would seem quite clear that those advising that there is clear and irrefutable evidence to bring these claims successfully, and therefore my comments above may, I hope, give you cause for reflection, particularly when you consider the Hawkins case and your capitulation when faced with evidence, for instance, of your staff telling them that they had not suffered enough. If I can just turn to my own situation, wearing a second hat, I'm here as an ex-customer. Ross, 2 weeks ago, you are quoted as saying at the FT conference on banking standards, "Call me old-fashioned, but I want customers to pay us back." I was so bemused reading this that I had to read it again and check with my fellow SME Alliance colleagues who were present at the conference for confirmation that those were your words. So, Ross, for the avoidance of doubt and for the benefit of the audience, are those your words?
Could I answer briefly on the first point, and then I'll hand over to Ross. As I said at the beginning, briefly, we have set up two mechanisms to deal with customers who we accept, not in all cases we dealt with properly. The first is a refund of complex fees. That is underway, and quite a number of customers have received receive refunds. And secondly, a complaints mechanism, which is easy to use and which is overseen by a retired High Court Judge, William Blackman, so that people who believe that they were wrongly treated by GRG have a non-legal mechanism through which to complain. So that is what the board have decided to do, recognising that there were cases at a time when a large number of businesses were falling into GRG where we did not handle those customers properly. So that is a clear view and a clear decision that's been taken by the board since the last AGM. But I'll allow Ross to answer.
Speaking at the Business Standards Board, I did make that comment, but let's pop it correctly into context. I was talking about zero balance transfers on credit cards, where the outstanding balances is now 43% of outstanding balances on credit cards is at zero balance, and that has been growing dramatically. And I did say, you did quote correctly, but I'll pop it back into context for you. In regards to credit cards, people, I'm an old-fashioned banker, and we should get people paying their debts back. Thank you.
Okay, can I just then continue with the rest of what I was wanting to ask?
Well, can you be very, very brief? Because I'll try. You a lot of time.
Okay, I appreciate that, Chairman, and I thank you for your indulgence. Assuming that you are an old-fashioned banker, irrespective of whether it's credit cards or bank loans, I would assume that when you grant bank loans that you want the money back. And in that instance, Chairman and Ross, can I ask this? Ross, can I, and I'm going to offer an olive branch here for the final time, because I am aware that we have been through the court process, we've been to the Ombudsman, and in both instances they were found against the, the bank, found in the bank's favour. But to come back to the specific issue of borrowing and repayment, and I would ask you, Ross, to personally investigate. I had the dealings I had with RBS from May 1997, when I was introduced to the bank, and spent hours discussing and negotiating the proposal of moving our business accounts to the bank. I was old-fashioned enough to want to repay the loans I was asking for as quickly as possible, and if you read the file notes of that time, you ought to see that I explicitly requested the structure of the loans to allow for full repayment as soon as possible within the term time suggested by the relationship manager I negotiated with. The notes also ought to say that I was assured that early redemption would cost me 3 months interest penalty, as it was projected they would be residential mortgage-type loans. You ought to read that I agreed to become a customer and moved our accounts to RBS in July 1997. 16 months on from that, in November 1998, I would ask that you specifically see the file notes of the meeting that was held in Dundee with the relationship manager when the issue of full loan repayment was discussed. You ought to read that I asked for the figures outstanding in the loans so that I could authorise full repayment from cash on deposit, which was held on the 6th of November 1998, and it was more than sufficient to repay the loans that we had.
Well, I will ask Ross to look into this case, but I think we need to bring this to a halt. I've heard from everybody who wants to speak. I will hear from Mr. Waite a second.